your best demo yet, presenting yourself in pre-sales interviews. I'm excited to introduce you to our host and panelists for the session. We have host Frank Gorman, Senior Manager of Sales Engineering at Relativity, Lauren Gabrielson, Senior Enterprise Architect at Workday, Mark Winey, Pre-Sales Leader, and Ryan Lavallee, Vice President of Solution Engineering at Salesforce. All right, Frank, take it away.
Hey, thanks so much, Courtney. Thank you, everyone. And thanks to our last session host for what turned out to be a wonderful segue into interviewing. The end of that is like a perfect transition to what we're going to talk about today. We have an amazing group of panelists, Lauren, Mark, and Ryan. So appreciate all your time and everyone who took time out of their day to join this session. What we're going to do is take you through the life cycle of the interview process, and along the way, discuss how candidates can put their best foot forward. So we're going to start with the pre-interview part of the hiring cycle, particularly what you can do around prep, and go from there. So Lauren, just to start us off here, I'm going to come at you pretty quick with our first question, Lauren and Mark. I'm curious, we're in the pre-interview process. You haven't started, really any like particular calls with the company you're interested in or companies. What tools do you all utilize for interviews and applications in an efficient and thorough way?
Yeah, great question. And hello, everybody. So prepping for interviews and for applications, I think of it just like prepping for demos and discoveries. You use a lot of the same tools there. So one thing that I think is really beneficial is creating a prep template. You're doing a lot of the work over and over. So have that list of questions that you work through with every single company ready. So you just copy and paste it and redo that work. And then as far as specific tools, this is where AI comes in really handy. You can ask something like ChatGPT questions around finding key points in a job posting or the value points that the company cares about and tie those back to the interview questions, or put those in your resume before you submit the application. Company website, that's always going to be filled with a lot of great information. And if I'm interviewing somebody, I'm probably asking some questions related back to information that's on the company website. And then last, LinkedIn, right? Reach out to your community, find people that work for the companies and ask them questions. That's going to be a great resource for everybody.
And Mark, what do you think? That's obviously a great list from Lauren. Curious for your perspective as well.
Absolutely. And I actually took a few notes because even as a presenter, I learned things in each session. So to build on what Lauren just shared, my first desire always is to have that connection through LinkedIn. Great point. It's not always possible. When it's not possible, I try to work smart, not hard. What I mean by that is if I'm going to do what I call a blind application using my quotey fingers, I don't know anyone there, I'm throwing it over the fence. I only apply if the rec has been on LinkedIn or a job board for less than 24 hours. I want to be early in the pile. Then I want to hack the system. I want to follow up with an email direct to the HR manager, or direct to the hiring manager, or direct to a peer to ask them tips about the culture and how they like it there, things like that. Then I go into the qualification. As Lauren mentioned, having a template is ideal. I do have a template in a spreadsheet. I do use some of the tools she mentioned, obviously company background like Crunchbase or some other details about their market position, their revenue, their growth. Everyone likes to look at Glassdoor. What are the employees saying? I also go a little bit deeper and look at the LinkedIn bios of the leadership team. I might not report to those people, but my career is in their hands. And I want to know, have they had good exits if they're a startup? Where did they come from? What's their specialty knowledge? I'll go also to look at product, because from the sales engineering world, I'll look at G2. What are the users saying about their product? Is the market accepting their product? Are they getting great reviews? And potentially even their support site if it's available. Where are the complaints or challenges with the product? But most important to me, from a pre-sales perspective, is to watch a video online if it's available. And if it's not, during the interview process, to ask them, demo to me, because I want to be passionate about the solution that I'm going to be selling and want to fully understand the problem that it solves.
That's great. And that's some great advice, obviously, on the amount of research that goes into a particular company or position you're applying for. So thinking about positioning yourself for the actual interview, the first conversations, I'm curious, Lauren, what are 3 top things that a candidate should have prepared that they can speak to in an interview?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that's going to come up, and one of the most important things in my perspective, is your answer to tell me about yourself. I love when you
Definitely.
use storytelling there. Tell the story of where you started in your career journey and how you got to where you are today, and connect that back to the role you're applying for. That's a great way to highlight different success points you've had in your career, and also explain exactly why you're interested in that specific role. And also, it can make or break your interview. That's the first thing that the person you're talking to is going to hear. So along with that, I'd say have a good answer to why you're interested in that role. If you don't have a answer specific to that company, that also might make or break your interview. And then last is going to be just a list of stories from your past, from either work experience or school experience, depending on where you are in your career, with answers to common observational questions. So questions that are around, how you respond to different situations, and use that STAR format. So situation, task, action, result, I think is it is. But we can send you over information on the STAR format. I'm sure it's being mentioned throughout today.
Yeah, that's great. And I personally could not agree more. When I was thinking about this question, one of the things I was thinking is those succinct talking points on your experience are so key. Not just the highs, but also the lows as well. You're going to get asked how you overcame certain challenges. In particular, in our interview question template, I know we ask, like, what is the most challenging situation you faced in your last job and how did you kind of overcome it? So just having that, like, top of mind, your story around your highs and your lows is so key. I also think a good list of questions can be beneficial, and not like perfunctory ones. You really like your questions should serve 2 purposes. They should give you more information, like the last panel was talking about at the end. Like, you want to feel good about the decision you're making, and it's your chance to explore a role and to really dig into what that company and role are all about. And also, just like Mark was saying earlier, firm understanding on the company and the role, I think is based on your prep is key. You should have some ground level expectation about what you're signing up for. It's such an obvious question, but what's the day-to-day look like in this role? Like, when I'm personally interviewing, I like to know, like, what am I sitting in a chair and doing hour by hour? So, we've talked a bunch about prep. I want to move into the actual interview phase now. And, you've done your prep, the company's reached out, they want to get things scheduled. Many hiring start with a HR or talent acquisition screen to kind of put you through the first steps. Ryan, I'm curious, from your experience, what questions should you be asking that first touch point to really get an understanding of the role?
Well, I think it's important for all of us to keep in mind that the recruiter's job is to pass as many qualified candidates as they can to the hiring manager. And ultimately, they're going to be compensated on placements, right? So the recruiter is going to make up their mind about you during that one call. There's, I'm sure, interest further on down the process, but for the most part, the recruiter's job is to qualify you in or out on that call. So what does that mean? It means that once they've decided that they're going to pass you on to the hiring manager, they're probably in your corner, because the best possible outcome for a recruiter is they find 3 candidates, they pass them to the hiring manager, they all go through the process, and the hiring manager comes back and says, they're all qualified, they're all great, I'd hire all 3 if I could, these are my priorities. That's a home run, which means that you can make that recruiter your ally. So I would start asking them as many questions as that you can about what's the process. If they're willing to unveil who you're going to interview with, ask them about those people. What are their hot buttons? What are they concerned about? Different interviewers are going to have different things that they may be asked to dig into on a candidate. If you can find out what those are, that's great. Also, if the recruiter is not a contractor and is an employee of the company, that's a great opportunity to do some discovery about some additional background of the company, things they like, things they don't. And if best thing of all you could do, if you can draw out any challenges that the hiring manager has expressed to the recruiter, then you can go into the process and do some solution selling.
I love the use of the term discovery. That's a key sales engineering experience, bringing it to the table. Lauren and Mark, anything to add on kind of leveraging that relationship with the HR and talent acquisition management?
I just have a quick comment here. I mean, I think Frank, you brought this up, but you're interviewing the company as well. So if you have a list of deal breakers, you could ask the recruiter some of those questions, and it's always okay to bow out of an interview process if that company or that position is not meeting your specific needs. And that early on process is honestly a great place to do that if you see the fit.
Good points. One thing I've seen from my perspective as a hiring manager, talking to my internal recruiters, is people don't often take these initial screenings quite as seriously as they should. This is just a gatekeeper. They don't know all the details or many details at all sometimes about the job. They're just checking, they're just filling out a form. But there are two things to remember. Number one, there are table stakes that we talked about earlier, and you might want to write this down because it comes up a couple of times. The table stakes questions that come up again, we said these earlier. Why this company? Why this role? And tell me about yourself. All those things are closely related and give you an opportunity to specify your unique value proposition for that particular role. Number two, what comes to mind is, depending on how long the recruiter has been there, over a year, hopefully, why are you happy to be there after 1, 2, 3 years? Tell me why you're energized to come to work every day. I always like to hear those answers. A longer tenure is, of course, better. And who fits in? Get some clues about the culture, which we'll go into deeper in a few minutes. I ask, this is my go-to question for every stakeholder I talk to. What do you feel? And Ryan worded this differently, but it's the same concept. What are you concerned about? What's the hiring manager concerned about? So my go-to question for Ryan's question is, what are the top 3 requirements for the ideal candidate? And they could be technical skills, soft skills, personality attributes, could be anything. And when you isolate it to those top 3, now you're using your solution selling superpower to carefully select relevant stories and accomplishments for the rest of the interview to guide that discussion in the right direction. And most importantly, as Ryan brought up earlier, make this person your ally. They can't say, yes, you're hired, but they can say no. They are an important gatekeeper. Make them your friend, engage them, take it very, very seriously. You want that gate to stay open.
All great points. And, you know, Mark, you touched on culture. I'm curious if we can dig into that a little bit more. How do you investigate that corporate culture throughout the interview process?
Yeah, I've learned this from some lengthy interviews I've done with big companies like Amazon and others. Everyone talks about culture. They put it on their website. Maybe it's in the office up on the wall. Maybe it's even on the back of a business card. At any rate, I want to understand if it's real. So I kind of turn the tables and I ask behavioral-based questions back to the interviewer. For example, I'll say, you know, I looked at your culture, your 5, key items for great culture. And what really resonated with me was collaboration, or pick one that is meaningful to you. So my question is, can you, Mr. Interviewer, give me an example of something that happens here, but it's very unlikely to happen at other companies because of the unique culture? And if they have 1 or 2 stories queued up, great, you're probably on the right track. If they don't, if they struggle, might just be words on the wall. So buyer beware. And there are other situations where I'll try to uncover how do they collaborate? So how do they operationalize a very healthy collaborative culture, or whatever point you're going after. So for collaboration, I might say things like, tell me how you're using your Slack channels today other than client meetings, sales calls, internal projects. And if they have a really cool list of stuff like pet photos and other things, it might give you a clue that they don't take themselves too seriously, and they might be a friendly bunch of people to work with and hang out with. And also asking, how are organizational changes made? How are they communicated? What was the last big change and how did you hear about it? You're trying to stay away from companies that have that top-down mandate, CEO to middle management down to you with no feedback loop. That's what you're looking for and listening for. but really just aligning your responses accordingly. Now, again, back to solution selling. Examples of how have you shown collaboration? How have you shown teamwork or innovation, assuming those are part of their corporate culture? Giving stories for each of the cultural points. I've done this in interviews and in my thank you letters to just have a little bit more punch. And really just sharing any personal experience that aligns with those values is really going to resonate, because they want fit. Anyone can fit technically, but they want cultural fit as well. And so do you.
Absolutely. Lauren, anything to add there? I saw you nodding along.
Yeah, I mean, I think just one additional question that I like to ask recruiters or hiring managers is, why is the role open? And it seems like a very simple question, but the answer gives you insight into that culture. Did they leave after 6 months because that person didn't like the company, or maybe didn't like the hiring manager because they were, somebody that was over invasive? Or did they leave because somebody got promoted into a new role? So you see a company that promotes internally. So that kind of answer provides you some insight that you can look into.
Absolutely agree. And I saw a question in the chat around, like, how to kind of ask questions to probe around, the culture and the role itself. And one of the things that came to mind for me personally is, as sales engineers, we have to partner with account executives so often. I like to know what their turnover rate is with account executives. If they are just ripping through account executives, and I'm going to have a different partner, or my team's going to have different partners, every month, it probably speaks volumes about the culture there.
Yeah. Along with that, what's the ratio of
Yeah.
to
Great
executive?
stuff.
Are you drowning in different opportunities? That's rough.
Absolutely. So, beyond culture, obviously, we also have the classic list of job requirements, right? You look at an application, you've mapped yourself to them. How should candidates view that list of job specs, that full list of tech competencies? Should they view it more as a wish list, or as hard and fast requirements that you need all of them for a job? Yeah, Lauren, I'm wondering if we can start with you for that one. Yes, no, my fault.
I think view them as a wish list until you validate that they are hard and fast roles. When people are creating those job postings, oftentimes you're reusing old job postings, or you have influence from different parties. And so as somebody who's looking at interviewing or applying, you don't know where that lines up. You also don't know who's making the end decision. So who is that decision maker? Is it just the hiring manager? Does sales have influence? They all might have different priorities. I'd also say don't discount yourself or avoid applying because you don't meet 100% of those requirements, right? You don't know until you ask those questions. I've totally been there before, where I come from a computer science background. I haven't coded in 10 years, but I think I still have C++ in my resume, right? So if a application asks for coding experience, I still may apply. And maybe I get into that interview cycle and I realize they do want me to code every single day. At that point, I'll probably just bow out because I don't want to code every day. But you don't know how important that is until you start having those conversations.
Definitely. And Ryan, curious for your thoughts as well.
I agree with everything Lauren said. I think she put it perfectly. I guarantee you that if you see a list of competencies and skills in a job description, they're not all must-haves. And they're probably not all equal. So I would, if you're interested in the role, you see a good number of skills that match your skills, I would jump in and go for it, because you don't really have a way of knowing until you have a conversation which ones of those skills really are the most critical ones. And even if you only meet 60%, 50%, if you have the 2 or 3 that are really vital to the role and hard to find, you could be the lead candidate. So just keep that in mind. That is a wish list.
Definitely. So it sounds like, you're trying to suss out what is most important out of that list is key, it feels like, Ryan. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And Mark, yeah, to that point, I'm curious if you could expound on that a little. Yeah.
Yeah, I love the fact that our panelists are referring to it as a wish list. Sometimes I'll call it a Christmas list, or it's like an RFP, right? What do you do when a massive RFP drops? You spend all of your time trying to figure out what the heck is important here, right? So Treat it like that. So that is why my go-to question that I go back to with each and every stakeholder again is, give me your top 3 criteria for that ideal candidate. Because especially from a pre-sales perspective, remember, we collaborate and bridge relationships across departments. So I need to know for each stakeholder what's most important. Top 3 for my sales stakeholders, marketing, product management, implementation. Any group that I'm going to look to talking to is going to have a different agenda and different needs, and I need to speak to those in each and every meeting. To the hiring manager directly, I always like to find out that pain or that problem. So what's most important? Tell me what's going very well today. Tell me what can be improved. Just let them talk. Open questions, the same way you would ask in a discovery call. And most importantly, how can you fix? So how can you pitch in? So what's the key problem that I can help you with in the first 90 days? And again, let them talk, take some notes, and then relate the stories and accomplishments back to that.
Definitely. And Mark, I appreciate that perspective so much. And, Ryan, Mark, and, throughout that kind of sussing out of the skills, like once you've identified the key skills for a given role, I'm curious, how do you promote those, or the ones that you think really highly match up to that job?
Well, you've heard it from Mark and you've heard it from Lauren that you've heard them talk about stories, right?
Yeah.
And I think one thing that I hope everyone takes away from this discussion is facts are easily forgettable, stories are very rememberable. So I would encourage everyone to have a handful of really great success stories that you're prepared to discuss when you get onto your interview. And the good thing about stories is you can use them to your advantage. So for example, if you think one of your differentiators is, I'm great at objection handling, and objection handling isn't a skill that they ask about in the interview, but they ask you about, tell me about a time when you won a big deal. Well, then you can work into that story. Here's my win story about my objection handling was one of the ways that we were able to disarm the audience. And the other thing to keep in mind is that whenever you're asked a question that starts out with the words, tell me about the time, it's always going to come across better if you have a real story from your background that you can tell versus a hypothetical.
Absolutely. And I think like that pairs nicely with the pre-sale skills to use within the interview process. Storytelling is this theme we keep hitting on. I'd love to kind of get into more of the pre-sale skills where in how we apply them to the interview. So Lauren, what pre-sale skills do you use or do you look for in a job interview process?
Yeah, I feel like I'm summarizing because we've talked about a lot of this already, but you're always doing discovery during interview process. Whether you think you're leading the call or not, you should be doing discovery. Tailoring to your audience, right? If you're talking to a hiring manager, you're going to be asking different questions and responding maybe a little bit differently than you would be if you're talking to a recruiter or a CEO in a startup scenario. Storytelling, like Ryan said, always answering storytelling. And then once you get to a stage where you're demoing, you need to be demoing value and being focused on the why. Why does this matter to my audience?
Definitely. And Mark, I know you've done a whole podcast on applying pre-sale skills to interviews. So would love to hear what you think too.
Yeah, basically, I'm going to summarize what I talked about for a half an hour on 2 pre-sales in a pod, episode 74. So rather than send a link out or whatever, I'm going to summarize 30 minutes. And this is kind of in the middle, but this is also kind of like a closing summary. So I would again encourage people to write down these 3 things to remember. To summarize what we've been talking about today, you're using your superpowers as an SE across the 3 areas we've been talking about: discovery, your pitch, and your follow-up. So by using those superpowers, number 1, discovery, you're always going to remember to ask strategic and open questions to be memorable. I'd like to use AI as a tool to ask me, give me examples of behavioral-based questions that might be asked of me or that I can ask them during the interview process, and have that as my own knowledge base to practice against. So discovery, number 1. Number 2, pitch. Alignment of the stories that Ryan was talking about with their pain and their values and corporate culture. The more alignment there is, the more likely you are to just breeze through some of the other gates. And third and finally, never ever just check in. Never ever just follow up. Those are messages of desperation. I'm just following up, any news. What you want to do is add value with every single touch point in outreach. So while it truly is a follow-up, you don't use those words. Say, hey, by the way, I found this great podcast I'd like to share with you. I found a sales lead I'd like to share with you. I found an interesting article that I would like to share with you. And by the way, I look forward to continuing the conversation. Boom. That's it. Don't come with, humility. Please give me an update, add value at each step, and they will definitely remember that.
Yeah, totally. This is off the cuff, but I remember once I had a candidate come into an interview in a conference room and they brought handouts of a project they worked on. And I was like, oh my, they brought handouts. Like, this is great. So yeah, that takeaway, that adding value to each interaction is so key. One of the things particularly that comes up with pre-sales interviews that's a little bit different than your standard one is the demo process, right? We all like to, I think it was funny when we were prepping for this panel, we all just sat and said, all right, raise your hand, who makes candidates go through a demo when they're interviewing? It's going to come up. It's bound to happen. So would love to dig into that. How, Lauren, we'll start with you. How do you pick a product and mock up a demo and prepare for that process?
Oh, I have thoughts here. So I went through interview processes and applications last year doing a job search. And so I kind of know what the market is like right now, and it's rough, right? A lot of these companies are sending you through 5-6 rounds, and then they end with a demo panel. And I know that some give you the option to pick a product to demo. Others will just say, you need to demo my product. So first, on picking a product, if you have the option, pick something that you're comfortable with and that you can talk and articulate the value of, because that's what you do as an SE, is you're articulating value, you're tying it back to the why for your customer. So find something you're comfortable with, or if you have to demo the product for that company that you're applying for, do your research, right? There's probably a lot of good information out there, whether it's demo videos online, whether it's help articles. Really go and do that research. I found some great videos in the past, just like searching on YouTube, and you use those to mock up my presentations, and those went off really well. The second advice here is if the company offers a demo prep mentor, which I think a lot of companies do, just somebody who's on the team, a peer of yours, take them up on it, ask them educated questions, and make sure to take into account their feedback, because this is a test in itself, right? They're probably testing you to see your coachability and your curiosity. Are you digging into the product? Are you asking questions? Are you using that time wisely? When I've been interviewing people in the past, I always go back to that demo mentor and I ask them, how did those conversations go? What feedback did you give them? Incorporate your storytelling, bring it back to value. And then ask the questions that you would ask your AE, right? Before you prep the demo. So who is the audience I'm demoing to? Are there opportunity details that I should be thinking about? Really think about this from the perspective of, I'm an SC on this team today. I'm prepping for a conversation with my customer. Here's all the questions I need to answer.
That's great. And Ryan, I'm curious, how do you avoid the gotchas as well during that process?
Well, I'll let everybody on some inside baseball here. This is a setup. It is not real. No one on that panel is going to buy software from you. They are purposely going to try to trip you up. So if your plan to ace this demo is to learn everything you possibly can about the subject matter, thinking there's no way they're going to ask a question I don't know the answer to, I promise you they're going to ask you a question you don't know the answer to, because they want to see how you're going to handle it. So I would zoom out and focus on preparing, look like you prepared, keep your cool, knowing that they're going to throw some curveballs at you just to see how you're going to react, and just try to come across as professionally and likable as you can.
Great. And Mark, this is obviously a big talking area. It's something that's that last kind of hurdle to clear off, into Lauren's point. So
yeah, I'm not gonna. I just crossed off 2 items I was going to talk about. I don't want to duplicate what Lauren said, but I want to emphasize what Lauren said. She talked about asking questions. I will push and push and push and ask questions until they say, you know what? I can't tell you anymore. it wouldn't be fair.
Yeah.
That's when I stop asking questions. And as a hiring manager, I give more bonus points behind the scenes to the person who pushed and asked the most questions. That's what I do as a hiring manager. So treat it like a real demo, as we said. And the ones who really impress me, send me an email after the demo, not a follow-up email with value statements, but an email still in character. Hey, this was a great demo, and I feel, your pain was A and B, and C and D is how I think we can solve it, and here's the potential ROI. And then after that, send your follow-up about, where do we stand? But seeing that email in character, I'm like, wow, they're really on point. That might be a template email, but that's fine. They're taking this very seriously, and that goes a long way with me. If you're asked to create PowerPoint slides, don't be afraid to draw outside the lines. Use your own deck or modify their template. If the flow can be improved and my candidates do that, it blows me away.
Can I have one more thing here, Frank?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Fire away. Sorry to come off mute.
Yeah, back to what Ryan said about this as a setup, and they're trying to trip you up. When they're trying to trip you up, they also might be trying to see how you do objection handling. And if you can say, I don't know. If I hear somebody during an interview give me an answer and they're just faking it, I don't trust them, right? I don't want somebody on my team giving fake answers to clients. I'd much rather have them say, I don't know the answer to that. Let me get back to you. So that's something, when we're testing you, that's a test that I've done for interviews before.
Absolutely. And it feels like ultimately, like, to draw a through line through everything you all said, which is great advice. It's you're demoing essentially like the character role of being a sales engineer versus your product knowledge. Like, you are not trying to learn a product in a week or however long they give you to prep. You are trying to show that you can execute as a sales engineer. And those are ultimately different things. Yeah, no, that's a great point, Lauren. Appreciate it, everyone. Thank you so much. All right, you made it through the demo. You've succeeded. You haven't faked any answers to questions. Now you're sitting, you've got an offer in front of you. We're going to talk a little bit about negotiation in the next section. So I don't want to completely, step on their toes, but it would be remiss if not to bring this great interview home. Mark, I want to start with you. What tips do you have for negotiating when you've got an offer in front of you?
I will be very brief because it is covered in the next section. I do have a spreadsheet, and there are financial and lifestyle and logistical categories that I go through, plus or minus. Obviously, the salary's got to be, meet your expectations to a point. But I've turned down jobs before and turned down an offer twice. They kept increasing it because I realized they had the same medical provider that I had, but I had 90% coverage and lower monthly premiums, and they had 70% coverage, plus higher monthly premiums, plus higher prescription drug prices for me and my family. And when I did an apples to apples comparison, it was going to cost me thousands. And I was able to prove that out to them. And they adjusted the offer accordingly. So remember, the devil can be in the details. 401k matching. You could be leaving money on the table if you don't ask about that, because if my salary is borderline and they have a match, then I'm much more likely to accept. And then of course there's all of the entertainment and lifestyle things, but quality of life. One of my employers had a 4-day work week. Do they have a home office allowance? Sometimes there are hidden benefits. Sometimes after a job, I realize, oh, I have this much covered for my gym. Well, that's found money. I have this much covered for my home office. That's found money. So, feel free to be creative and ask questions.
Yeah, definitely. Lauren, anything to add?
Yeah, I think one of the things I found most helpful is early on in a job search, sit down and think about your list of priorities. What do you care about from a financial perspective? What do you care about from a work-life balance? What are your deal breakers? And doing that before you get deep into an interview with a company is going to help you have a clear mindset when you're analyzing job offers, going back to what's important for you and your family. It really ties that back. Ties everything together to make sure that you're making the right decision for yourself.
Absolutely. Sorry, go for it, Mark.
No, that's really good. To Lauren's point, it just reminded me my spreadsheet has not just plus minus, but minimum salary, minimum level? Is it manager level? Like there are certain things where you just draw that hard line, as Lauren was alluding to.
Definitely. And the other thing I would be remiss not to bring up is commission. A lot of sales engineering roles are commission based. So asking around, like, I like to check, and, you know, I appreciate when candidates check with us, like, how often are you hitting, you know, what's your quota attainment? How often are you hitting that number? Because if, you know, you may get a crazy on target earnings number placed in front of you, but if they are not hitting those goals frequently, you're never going to sniff it. And so, like, they have historics in house. Yeah, Ryan, anything to add there? Sorry, I know I saw you shrug there.
No, I think that's such a great point and easily missed. If they throw out a big number, I would immediately ask that question: how many people are actually hitting this? Because you can see the biggest number in the world, but if there's maybe the company doesn't hit their side of it, or there's components to it that are out of your control, it's another consideration. It's a great point.
That number, your purview and under your control. SE comp plans, I've written many of them, could be your individual deals only, your team deals only. So individualism, socialism, or hybrid right down the middle, which is one of my favorites, where your deals plus a portion of team deals. So that's important to understand as well.
Yeah, and if you're at the point where someone's got an offer in front of you, like, it's okay to ask those questions. They do not want to, like, lose. They also just went through 6 interviews. It's not fun on the other side of the table. They don't want you to walk away at that point. They're ready. Like, you know, you should feel a mutual sense of comfort. So I think we're pretty right on time for starting questions just about, and I see a number of them kind of filling up in the chat. Just a quick note. For helpful organization, if you don't mind submitting them in the Q&A, that would be great. But I can grab a couple of them from the chat, and we can start from there. One of the things I see is, like, is it, you know, to the point we were just talking about, is it appropriate to ask for proof of hitting that sales quota? I'm curious if anyone has any thoughts on that.
Ask for proof, like, show me something in writing that validates what you're telling me. Is that
yeah, or some sort of indication, it seems like.
I mean, I would be, this is personal opinion, I'd be hesitant to ask for proof of something like that, because right off the bat, I don't think you want to start a relationship with your manager that you don't trust them. Prove it to me. Maybe, you know, if you've met some other people in the interview process that you're comfortable reaching out to, you might validate that in some way. But I would steer away from, okay, I'm going to need to see proof of what you just told me in writing. That might not be a good way to start off.
That is spot on. I might ask that question for director or VP level, understanding where has the team been that I'm leading and how much work is to be done. But from an individual contributor, Ryan is spot on. You can summarize what you can learn from the peers. That's about it.
Yeah, absolutely agree. All right, let's get back, you know, within the interview process itself. We've got a great question here. What guidance do you have for someone when you're interviewing for a company and it's a very different culture, like not corporate culture, like culture? Curious if anyone wants to take a first stab at that one.
I don't know if I know what we mean there.
Well,
he's like,
you're
talking like Middle East versus West, you know.
That's how I'm reading the question. Yeah,
culture.
it's an anonymous attendee, so if anyone feels like clarifying in the chat, but yeah, I'm reading it as, like, you know, international culture potentially. Yeah.
I mean, I guess I would just suggest do the best you can to try to learn about any differences in doing business in that culture as you can. I mean, it's kind of a tough one unless you know, if it's an international situation, if you have a colleague that you can reach out to that resides in that country and might be able to help you out, that might be a good step. Learn as much as you can, I guess, would be my answer.
Yeah, the curiosity, I think, is a big part of it. And then a good question that I think is common to ask in interviews, but would be helpful here would be, you know, what would make me successful in this role, or what makes candidates stand out? Because some of those cultural differences might come out.
And I think about something you said earlier, Lauren, too, about like what's your wish list? Like there are like cultural or values wish lists too that are core, and maybe like you have to weigh those against the situation you're walking into as well. And then this is a great one. What's your take on handling a lack of structure and ambiguity in the scenarios and questions? I believe this was asked around the time we were talking about demos. So lack of ambiguity, or sorry, a bunch of ambiguity in those situations or questions being asked. How would you all handle it? Yeah, go for it, Mark.
Yeah, so there we go. So let me just drop my hand. There we go. So that is also the art and science of sales engineering. Lauren brought up earlier, one of the art and science of sales engineering is being able to not BS an answer. The second piece to this art and science of sales engineering is knowing when to go deeper. Some people call it peeling back the onion. So one of my mentors always told me, what is the question behind the question? Think in the frame of who the stakeholder is asking the question. And if there's anything ambiguous, don't be afraid to pause, take a breath, clarify that question and what's important to them. And if you do that, trust me, they're trying to trip you up for a reason. This is one of the ways they're going to do it. And asking those clarifying questions will score you more points.
Definitely. I smiled when I saw this question because it was like the ambiguity might be the point. Like there may be some attempt there for you to do that, to Ryan's point earlier, that discovery and really dig in. Like that question may be intentionally vague, or that scenario on a demo script. It's all a little bit of like, how are you operating as a sales engineer?
And what a great opportunity for you to demonstrate how you can take control of the cycle and move the goalpost to a position that's in your favor.
Yeah, definitely. And it reminds me of what Mark said earlier, like ask questions till they tell you to shut up and stop asking questions. All right. All right. Someone confirmed we did talk about it, the culture one. We were in the right direction there. This one is great one that came up in the chat earlier. I'm wondering if someone wouldn't mind hopping in. How should we optimize our time, like the tell me about yourself questions? How should you convey your story in a certain amount of time without overwhelming the hiring manager?
I think the best way is to customize it to the audience and the role you're applying for. You might have a long history, a lot of different jobs you've had, but not every single one is going to be relevant to the role at hand. So use that story to tie back the value points that they're looking for, or that you think they're looking for based on the job posting, and test it out with your peers, right? I'm very lucky. I have people I've met through my career that will tell me straight up if my answer is good or bad, or call me out. So I will test those stories out with those individuals. And that's the really great benefit of having this network through Presales Collective or mentors.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And I was thinking back to something you said earlier as well, or we all kind of touched on, which is like, you just got to do your prep too. I don't think like the tell me about yourself is a great place to wing it. Have that elevator pitch written down. Like you can see how lengthy, and I'm feeling myself getting wordy right now. Even like you're going to be more succinct if you have something in writing. You can hone that edge a little bit more.
For me, there's sort of a little formula that I use. Tell me about yourself, your career journey in just a few sentences, 3 or 4 sentences, which brings me to my 3 key accomplishments, as Lauren said, that apply to that role, which brings me to the journey. Why am I interested in this particular role, especially if it's a step up, the next step in your career? So really, you're just swapping out those middle 3 accomplishments. And like she said, absolutely rehearse it for content and timing. And pretty soon it'll just flow.
We one more great one from the chat here. Katie asked, what would you suggest a pre-sales leader looking to find a recruiter to help find a more senior role? I'm reading that, and Katie, feel free to hop in and tell me if you think I'm incorrect on advice for helping to find a more senior role. How do you work with a recruiter to really find that extra seniority you're looking for if you're looking to maybe backfill or bring someone in with more experience?
I assume they're thinking about a team leader, not a principal, not a senior IC.
Could be either or. Yeah.
Okay, so I see, yes, a senior leader.
Senior leader. Okay.
So,
Yeah.
so
Thanks, Katie.
I will look for two people as a hiring manager because I've been a senior leader, but I've also had skip reports. So I had SE managers rolling up to me. And one of my hires had no SE leadership experience. However, she ran her own company very successfully. So I look for those transferable skills, maybe from another technology company. I also potentially look for a principal or very senior individual contributor if they can show me some thought leadership and a lot of contributions mentoring others. If they have a passion for mentoring and developing others, they can do it.
It's a great point. And Katie notes, one of the things they had to work with an external recruiter rather than an internal one. Have either of you all had to operate or work with an external recruiter to fill a role? And any advice there? I
Personally,
not,
not a whole lot. I've worked with externals briefly for key roles, but I always try to convert them to some type of contract.
Sure.
I want them to deeply understand my business. I would have to noodle on that for a while. I don't have and I'm using my SE response. I don't have a complete deep answer for you at this time.
That's great. A great callback, Mark. No, that's awesome. I know we're coming up close on time. Any other questions anyone wanted to get in? Well, we've got a minute or two left with our panelists. Great. Well, then I'll quickly plug that we've got a breakout session next. And first of all, thank you everyone who joined today. Thank you to the wonderful group of panelists, Mark, Lauren, Ryan, invaluable perspectives. I really, really appreciate it. There's a breakout session right after this, then be sure to stick around for the whole summit, because in session 4, our panelists are going to be digging deeper into that negotiation process. So you're at the offer phase, what you need to do there in particular.
Wonderful. What an awesome session. Frank, you took my thank you right out of my mouth.
Oh,
Thank you all
sorry,
so
Courtney.
much for being here.